Brothers and sisters, so we continue these days with Saint Therese, and I'll finish with a story which some of you have probably heard from me before, but there's so many been added to Heartreach since then, so I want to share the story again. But let's just finish up a few things on Saint Therese from yesterday. And I just want to clarify, when we speak about Saint Therese of Lisieux and her complete dependence on God, by no means is she saying that we cannot make any effort or we cannot do good works or that we cannot try our best. Of course, Saint Therese herself, she took on many mortifications, she took on many little sufferings. She couldn't do the great big things, but at the end of the day, she still was, I think, a person of great heroism because of how weak she was because of her sickness and her different frailties, that she still had a strong will. And this is very much the teaching of her own spiritual mother, you could say, Saint Teresa of Avila, who says very important in this spiritual life is that we make a firm determination of the will to turn ourselves completely to God and to seek holiness with all our heart. Unless we make that firm decision, and it's a grace, so we must ask God for it. And if it's stirring in your heart to ask God for that grace, and that's a good sign that God will give it to you. God doesn't inspire, Saint Therese would say, useless graces. And so Saint Therese, a few things about her life is that she would do her very best, but it wouldn't be something slavish. She knows that at the end of the day, there's a limit to her own works, her own effort. In fact, that anything good in her, she would say, is all grace. It is all grace at work in her. But she would realize that God has all the power and all the grace to perfect her and bring her to heaven. And for this brings her tremendous joy and peace until she would go through a very specific trial towards the end of her life. But until then, she would really experience a sense of heaven and the joy of knowing that God is her Father and that God is all powerful to help her. And I gave the image a few days ago that Saint Therese spoke about modern inventions like the elevator. And she said, today she was looking for a shortcut to God's heart, a shortcut to perfection. And she would say, looking around, she said, today we have the elevator, and no longer do you have to climb stairs and all that effort. You can go in the elevator and come straight to the top very quickly. So she was looking for something like that in the spiritual life. And she discovered it, as we've been talking about, on the mercy of God, His grace, relying with that complete trust. She's a saint of an amazing confidence and trust. And she knows that confidence and trust in God is already a sign that God is going to give forth those graces. So if we find ourselves with little trust and little confidence, let's ask God for that grace. I remember doing a retreat years ago, and this is when this first came home to me in a strong way. And the preacher said to us that, we pray for faith, we pray for love, but we often don't pray for hope. So do you pray for hope? Do you pray to grow in hope? Do you pray to have great confidence? And I believe that when we ask this of God, God's just dying and cannot wait to give us these graces. But He wants us to really own our salvation with Himself, and wants us to also be part and take responsibility of our spiritual life. So we must ask. And so Saint Therese she would see the elevators. She would see Jesus's arms of mercy like this elevator. Another image she also has is like a little child going up the stairs, going up, trying the best, could only reach stair 3 and keeps falling back. Then eventually the father just comes and picks the child and brings the child to the top. And so again, we have our effort, but ultimately only God could bring us to that place, to be with Him at the top, to live at that level of grace and communion with Him, The story I want to share today is a great story about the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And this is about a young man who fell away from the faith. It's a true story. He fell away from the faith. He ended up becoming an atheist. And then one day, he had an experience when he was in his early 20s where he experienced an apparition of Jesus as the Sacred Heart. And in it, he saw this nun in the apparition. And Jesus said to him, that nun's prayers have gone towards your conversion. And he just knew with all his heart that this nun was real and that one day he would meet her. That young man went on to be a priest, and then he became a cardinal, and he became a very influential cardinal. His name is Cardinal William von Kettler. He wrote a lot about social justice and the mission of the church to help the poor and to look after the sick, to take care of the needs of those most in need. And so it wasn't towards the end of his life, he was giving a visitation to a convent. And he had looked out for this nun all his life. But here it was in the prime of his life, at the end of his life, and he was in this convent and he saw her. So he asked to speak to her. And when he went to interview her and speak with her, he found out, she didn't know who he was. She found out that she prayed all her life for priests and asked God for her sacrifices, her sufferings to give unto priests. And number two, he also realized that she had a huge devotion to the Sacred Heart. And this was the most amazing thing. He found out that the day that she was born was the exact same day that he had had the apparition of Jesus. And there were many lessons from this. Well, first of all, the incredible mercy of God, that if we ask God and offer our sacrifices to God, his mercy dispense the greatest graces. And the fact is, God is outside of time. Like this nun prayed and she wasn't even born yet, and God used her prayers.